17. He heard the tinkling bell that sounded in a distant place, and shivered in the cold, thin air. Thus he concentrated on sucking at his Egyptian cigarette, and scowling at the scene spread below them. Perhaps, at another time and in a different mood, he would have been able to appreciate the appearance of the sky from the hill to which they had traversed. For the sky wore aspects of Whistler's fabulous nocturne of black and gold, especially its clusters of yellow stars that spilled toward the valley beneath them and gathered as pools of golden ambience. "Are you coming in?" one friend inquired, standing near the entrance of the isolated hillside club. He waved the human pack away with the hand that held his gold-tipped cigarette. "One moment. I wish to commune with this eastern sky. Perhaps I can coax the hidden moon to reveal herself. I adore the moon and her chilly kiss. Proceed without me, and I shall follow anon." His party shrugged and turned away, and he watched them flow as gathered flesh through the double doors of the hillside edifice. "Au revoir," he muttered, turning his eyes so that they could follow the zigzag line of the pitted wall of stone that looked, to him, like some petrified python that had fallen into a slumber from which it would not arouse. They had to pass through a portal in that massive wall so as to reach their destination, and he wondered why such a wall was required to separate the lonesome hillside from the region of the valley town in which his people were vacationing. Finally, exhaling one final cloud of tainted smoke, he crushed the remnant of his weed beneath his foot and turned to examine the building's double doors. What had his companions called the place? The Club of 7 Dreamers. The mundane building would never inspire his dreaming, what with its dull and weathered planks so poorly put together. How it tilted and sagged, and how hesitant he was to enter its confines. The sound came to him again from some distant place. Tinkling bells. Turning to investigate, he scanned the other regions of the hill and detected a figure far away, a being cowled like some dreary monk. Yet as he looked longer, he could not be certain that it was a fellow being at all, for now it resembled an irregular chimney on which a small silver sphere had been painted near its top. Then the image began to blur and sting his eyes, and thus he turned away and shivered once again in the thin air that caused such discomfort when breathed in, and so he approached the double doors and entered the silent club. He was instantly deflated as he encountered the creature who awaited him, a nude nymph with gold and silver crystals sprinkled onto her pubic nest. Her petite breasts pointed their ruddy nipples to him, and he smirked as, fingering one, he whispered, "You should have been a boy." Handing her his heavy coat and wooden cane, he walked past the tables at which figures bent together suggestively, but as he scanned the room for his party he was disappointed by their absence. Perhaps they had wandered into some adjacent chamber. Something caught his attention, the suggestion of a sound, and as he turned to heed it he beheld a figure that transfixed him, a cloaked creature that stood before a wall of obsidian liquid. Beguiled by androgynous beauty glimpsed beneath the figure's hood, he approached the unmoving youth and marvelled at its supple limbs, fine pale face, and tantalizing phallus. Moving his hand, he touched the metal bell worn on a piece of gold wound round the handsome neck, and he shivered at how soft the metal felt, as smooth as cool new death. Tightening his fingers to the bell, he shook it once and laughed at its tinkling reply, and then, shutting his dazzled eyes, he leaned toward the cowled head and touched mouth to mouth. The phantom's kiss sucked him into a lagoon of night that rippled as liquid wall, and when at last he had imbibed his fill of passion and pulled his face away, he discovered that they had spilled into a dusky chamber wherein 7 coffin-shaped urns smoked upon their tripods. Approaching the nearest urn, he peered into its depths and beheld an obscure image that might have been a face, composed of fog and shadow, in which yellow eyes ignited. He blinked as these combustive elementals rose in coils of incense, and gathered in the dusky ether as a cluster of yellow stars, and as he watched his name was whispered, so that he turned to acknowledge the summons. The androgynous beast filtered to him through the gathered smoke and shadow, and he could not comprehend its alternation, for the white epicene countenance had altered so as to appear more feminine, and its breasts had horribly expanded, and its golden phallus had sunk from sight. He stood, tilting freakishly, as the cluster of yellow stars blinked about the region of the creature's pubis, glistening in the moist and fragrant mound. Tilting more, he fell onto his knees before the being's sex and sucked in its sharp perfume. As his nostrils expanded, the yellow points that were demonic eyes trembled with rising, and whirled to him until they sank into his own eyes, which transformed as liquid orbs of transformed jelly, that saw through mundane dimension and beheld another plane. A bell tinkled above him. Lifting his eyes to stare at the dead face beneath its hood, he saw the sphere that had once seemed a thing of flesh drift upward as a globe of lifeless lunar dust that cooled his dreaming face. He watched it hatch and spill its vision to him, and thus he understood. 18. I climbed the ancient steps of the moss-thick tower and looked upon the terraced garden of dream, the place for which my weary soul had ached. I found the cavity of ruin in the tower's wall, through which I squeezed my paltry flesh and bone, and then I leapt onto the high rough-hewn masonry, on which I balanced for a while, until intoxicated by the scent and sight below. Deliberately I stepped into the air and shut my eyes, but I felt no impression of falling from the wall, felt nothing but the press of hands upon a rough-hewn place. Yet I knew that I had vacated the high and corrugated wall, and so I slowly opened my uneasy eyes and found myself bent over a stony walk within the garden of dream. Ah, the soft sunlight on my entranced eyes! Oh, what beauty in the lullaby of nature all around! I rose and trod the rough-hewn path, stepping onto the smooth surface of an arching bridge, and stopping momentarily to watch my golden reflection in the gentle water's course. I admired the handsome structure of a white pagoda wherein a gigantic brass bell hung, and when I noticed the obsidian hammer resting upon a pillar of sculpted stone, I decided that I would bang the implement against the bell before departing the entrancing place. I knelt beside the delicate boughs of a cherry tree, and lifted handfuls of pink blossoms to the rose and yellow sky. My old dreams had not lied. The drowsy radiance of the place was enthralling, and the conjoined song of gentle river and whispered breeze lulled me toward an ecstasy of dream within a dream. Yet even as I closed my eyes, I could still sense the yellow radiance of the sun upon my lids, an aura through which rose-hued shadows blossomed. Tears of joy trickled down my happy face. I cannot recall the seduction of slumber, but suddenly I felt a chill upon my lips. I awakened in a terrarium of nightmare, my aching back against the trunk of a dead and fungus thing, my mouth against a barrier of glass. The still air was haunted by the echo of a mammal's wings. I staggered to my feet, and tripped along a path of broken stone, past the grey and splintered pagoda, where its tarnished brass bell had fallen and lay lopsided on the ground. I hobbled to the rough-hewn wooden bridge, and midway over its rotten surface, I bent over so as to glare aghast into the stagnant pool below. Sallow moonlight revealed my countenance of diseased yellow skin, a transparent sheath pulled tightly over the skull that held my desiccated brain. The wall was gone, replaced with an unending surface of glass, coated with night's slime, an ichor that made climbing an impossibility. I wept until I heard the clanging of a cracked bell, and when I turned to peer at the damaged pagoda, I beheld the eidolon that stood beside the tarnished bell, an implement in its hidden hand. Ah, perhaps I could use the black hammer so as to shatter the wall of glass. I flew to the phantom with rage and determination pounding my heart, but the creature did not fight me, rather it handed me the mallet, and seemed to study me, although I could detect no face beneath its cowl. I staggered to the wall of glass, and smashed my tool against it, and so ferocious was my madness that the wall began to crack and split. I heard the cool air before it claimed me, the suction from outside that plucked me through the splintered wall, into a nothingness that claimed me absolutely. 19. I hear the faint, far ringing of a deep-toned bell, as I carry you up the black mountain in this midnight wind. I have heard the call before, in deepest dreaming, but I do not imagine that I am dreaming now, this witching hour, for I feel too bitterly the sharpness of the clarion tempest, and I feel too sharply a pain in my ankles, as I traverse toward the apex of the spectral peak with my burden in my arms. You seem to reassure me with your wide and frigid smile, and I bend to kiss your eyes in which I see reflected frosty starlight, and thus, although exhausted, I continue my trek beside the centuried wall that meanders the mountainous region. The pealing vibrations have ceased their sound, and now the thin and chilly midnight air is still and lonesome as, at last, we reach our journey's termination. Gently I set your body onto the solid ground, and lean, deeply breathing, against the antediluvian wall on which queer symbols, here and there, have been engraved. And I wonder at the sight of the occasional towers atop that unending length of masonry, and cannot guess their function as, reaching toward the lunar sphere, they pierce the midnight air. And as I study one such thing, I imagine that a nameless fiend, winged and without face, glides to the conical point, and, hanging there while grasping on to the tower's tip, makes motions to the moon with other paw. I frown at the slender archway that serves as aperture leading through the centuried wall into another place, and at the coaxing of the midnight wind I grasp your pale hands and pull you through the slit in stone, into another realm where wind and earth contain a deeper chill. I glance again at the tower on the wall, which casts its phallic silhouette on garden's ground, but do not see the imagined fiend without a face, and thus I turn to contemplate the holes with which the ground is pockmarked. And as I tilt beside the nearest burrow, I smell a memory from deepest dreaming, and my mouth remembers strange, remorseless appetite. I smile at you, as one large hand claws the loose earth of the burrow and brings a handful of aromatic debris to my face, and I sigh as I wash the filth into my flesh, as other hand lifts to the moon. I creep to you, my adoring wretch, and you do not complain as I touch you with my grimy hands, and lift you so that your face, once more, is sheathed in ghastly lunar light, and, overwhelmed by your beauty, I bury my face within your hair as I trod the garden ground. Here is a weird white tree, whose bark is as smooth as cadaverous skin, and so I set you beside its trunk, and perform a dance in moonlight for your pleasure. Ah, your grin is wide, and I think that you would laugh, if only you could recollect how to stretch your jaws. I move merrily over an expanse of garden ground until, exhausted, I rest one hand against the centuried wall, and as I pant, I see the huddled thing nearby, and when I approach this other inhabitant, the moonlight reveals it to be a ruined thing of pulp and petrified bone, with a skull so cracked that one might imagine it to have been smashed against a wall of glass, and as I bend over its remains, I am overwhelmed by the rancid aroma of its ruination. I study the marks that perforate the exposed bone, and I close my eyes so as to taste dregs of recollection. But then the midnight wind whispers at my ears, and brings the scent of rank vegetation, and your sweet fragrance. Returning to you, I fall before you and bless your mouth with lover's passion, and then I fold your arms about my neck and lift you once again as, suddenly, bleak rain slips on to us from stormy sky. But do not fret, beloved, for there in the distance is the silent pagoda composed of crimson posts and roof of jade. We need but cross this wooden bridge so as to reach its shelter. But let us pause for just one moment, and peer into the squalid pool below us, and marvel at our sodden shadow on its liquid surface. Ah! The rainfall increases, and savages our dreaming visages, and so we rush into the shelter of the pagoda. This ivory pew, as lovely as the skin that sheathes your bones, will serve as couch until the storm has passed, and you look so lovely as I lay you onto it. Yes, I am intoxicated by the violence of the storm, and you smile at my clownish antic as I fling my limbs into the liquid air and dance on soggy sod. Then, returning to you, I notice the wooden mallet on its pillow of sculptured ebony, and with that mallet in my hand I approach the massive bell of brass that hangs from its post within the pagoda. I touch the surface of the bell and examine the figures embossed thereon, those devils poised like furtive apes. I lift the hand that holds the mallet and wink at you, and then I bring it down. Ah, the deep-toned reverberation! It seems to shake the earth, into which its vibrations sink as summons. I pound the massive bell once more, and its heavy sound dispels the storm so that, once more we see the demon moon, and in that dead sphere's suggestive illumination, I watch the shaggy shadows that ooze from out their earthly pits within the garden ground. I see them raise their canine snouts to Luna's influential light, and move into a bestial kind of dance. They pour through pits and call to me, their cousin. Some climb the wall and mount the ancient spires, so as to adore the moon with eyes of jade and paws that move symbolically. Some seep toward the remnant of flesh and bone that stains the dirt near one portion of the wall, and the stench of that mortal husk so clutches them that they raise their snouts so as to howl deliriously. And one last shape lopes towards us, my love, and grins rapaciously as it sniffs the aura of your decay, and then together, kindred creatures, it bends with me to kiss your chilly breasts.